Can you hit a freestyle right now real quick? Just give us something off the top of your head.
Oh, man, this guy's really putting me on the spot. TJ Dillashaw, Killashaw. Best bantamweight of all time. Nah, y'all. That's Dominic Cruz, y'all. Have you seen the footwork? Sugar Sean O'Malley, former guest on this here podcast. But we got to stop it down there because we're ill-prepared. And you know preparation is the key to everything I do. I'm nothing without my notes.
You may get an agent after all that. We'll have to wait and see.
Let's go.
Welcome to In Search of Excellence, where we meet entrepreneurs, CEOs, entertainers, athletes, motivational speakers, and trailblazers of excellence with incredible stories from all walks of life. My name is Randall Kaplan. I'm a serial entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and the host of In Search of Excellence, which I started to motivate and inspire us to achieve excellence in all areas of our lives. My guest today is Jon Anik. For the last 13 years, Jon has been the lead play-by-play announcer for the UFC, and according to his announcing partner, Joe Rogan, he is the best play-by-play commentator in the history of the sport. Along with former UFC fighter Anik Florian, Jon is a co-host of the very popular Anik Florian podcast. Jon, thanks for being here.
Randy, thank you.
Welcome to In Search of Excellence.
Great to be here with you. Thank you for having me. Welcome to South Florida.
Welcome. Thanks for having me. So I always start our podcast with our family, which shapes our future. You've never talked about your parents before, so tell us about your parents, what they were like, how they influenced you, and what's it like to be the oldest of four siblings and 3 seconds older than your twin brother who's here today.
Well, I know you're a father of twins, so you know just how special that whole twin thing can be. But you're right. I haven't sort of talked a lot in depth about my parents in the past. My mom, I think, is in large part the woman who made me the man that I am today. She has had a huge influence on my entire life, and not just when it comes to my golf game, but just a huge motivational force. And I remember when we were kids, we grew up in the Metro West Boston area. There wasn't like a public basketball league. So this woman started Wellesley Youth Basketball, which still exists to this day. You know, I think a lot of my work ethic was probably instilled by my dad. You know, he was a certified public accountant. He worked for Arthur Anderson. So that Enron situation back in 2001 was not kind to his bottom line necessarily. But, you know, he was just always working, and then he would come home and he would hit the pavement and run. And so I had a lot of different, my parents were very different, but I think they both sort of resonated with me in different ways. And I really think, though, in terms of my formative years, my siblings probably had even more of an impact on me than my parents did. Certainly, I could speak for the entire hour today about my monozygotic identical twin brother, Jason, and how much he has impacted my life. But then my younger brother and my younger sister as well. You know, I'm all about big families, and I feel like I was sort of forged by one. So, you know, I don't know that anybody realizes any modicum of success or anything hard in life without having a good base, and I certainly had that.
So your grandfather had season tickets to the hapless New England Patriots. What was that like, being a Boston sports fan? I mean, you're like the Detroit fans, right? We've got the Red Wings, we've got the Lions, we've got the Tigers, we got the Pistons. And for so many years, they were horrible. But you grew up going to all the games, through every play, and then you had to listen to the post game. What was that like, being with your grandfather?
So we were always diehard Boston sports fans, but the New England Patriots was the team that we had the season tickets for, and they were the laughingstock of the NFL. As you know, the doormat for 15 years or so, right? Dan Marino would just go into Foxborough. They'd lose 41-6. And to your point, great research. My grandfather would make me listen to the whole fucking post show on the ride home, and he would always have the heat just cranked. I just remember those losses, and I think that's why we waited to exhale and had the chance to exhale when all those Boston sports teams realized such great success. But I'm telling you, bro, my record as a fan in Foxborough, and I went to a lot of playoff wins and a lot of regular season wins, I'm probably 50 games under 500 as a fan. So it just speaks to just how lean those years were before the skies opened and Boston became title town there for a decade or so.
And that was pre-Robert Kraft. Was it
the
shaver guy,
exactly.
Victor, I forget his name, on the team?
Yeah, so in 1993, Bob Kraft bought the team, and essentially, I don't know if there was a poison pill in the contract that he presented my grandfather, but we had a box on the 50-yard line. It was pretty high up, but he wanted his father at that time to have that suite and basically put something in the contract that made it so my grandfather couldn't afford it. And that's at least as I understood it at the time, and we were no longer season ticket holders. So I think my grandfather had some bitterness towards Bob Kraft for a point in time, but when you went through what we did as fans, certainly there was a celebration, and very happy to, have watched all those championships. And my brother and I went to that last Belichick-Brady Super Bowl in Atlanta, Georgia. So, it's been a good few years for sure.
I was a long-suffering Lions fan for many, many years. When we went 0-16, I watched every play of every game down to the last one.
Wow.
And it was a great season. It was really fun. My wife and I went to the game up in San Fran. It looked good going to the Super Bowl until it didn't look good, but love our coach. It's so important to have a great coach to lead your team, and he really turned things around.
We talk a lot about leadership versus bosses, right? Bosses and leaders are two different types of things. And even though maybe people would scoff at Jared Goff, your quarterback, getting this big contract, he's a leader of men. He has proven as much, and his teammates want him to get that money. They put him over every chance they get. And I do think in life, I have come across a lot of people that are pretty good bosses. A select few are actually good leaders, and I think Goff's worth the money. I don't know how you feel.
I think when Goff came in, and again, this is what I think people thought, he was a throw-in for the Stafford trade. And Stafford, I think, is one of the greatest quarterbacks ever, and he never gets that due. He played on the worst team.
Interesting.
And Detroit had the worst record of any league in any sport for so many periods of time. When he went to Los Angeles, I was pumped for him. This is a guy who played injured, played on the worst team, never complained once.
Yeah.
And when Goff came in, everyone said, oh my God, he got this $36 million contract. He's going to be terrible. When Stafford came back to Detroit, as you know, people were yelling, Jared Goff, Jared Goff, Jared Goff. I don't know if you saw the draft, but that's when the fans were yelling out, Jared Goff when he came on stage. But it's been great to see him get the contract he deserved. Most people don't know he was in the top 3 of all categories last year in Detroit, which is a very blue-collar town, as you know. They don't like CEOs getting paid $20 million or $30 million, but no one's complaining about his $53 million a year contract. I think it's great.
And I'm not going to sit here and suggest that the Detroit Lions have superseded the Dallas Cowboys as America's team, but let me just submit to you as a New England Patriots fan and as a fan of the NFL, and I'm not telling you anything you probably don't know, but I can't tell you how many of us were rooting so hard for the Detroit Lions to run the table. And Dan Campbell, another great leader, a guy who you'd want to run through a brick wall for. Reminds me of Dana White, So we're rooting for you guys. I think they'll break through. But to your point, last year, that was a window and an opportunity. And even though I think their window might now be 3 years, last year was a pretty good opportunity.
I hope you're enjoying this video so far, but before we jump back in, I want to know if you've ever thought about what you need to do to reach the next level of success in your life. Over the last 25 years, I've been an advisor to more than 50 companies. I've invested nearly 100, including Google, Lyft, and Seagate, and I also co-founded a company that today is worth more than $15 billion. I've been incredibly blessed in my journey, and at this stage in my life, I want to give back. I want to share the lessons I've learned so you can reach incredible success way faster than I did. In my own journey, I've learned that having the right mentor is a massive advantage to achieving our goals. I'm hugely passionate about mentoring others, and I'm looking for a few hungry entrepreneurs who are excited to take action on their journey to incredible future success. So if that's you, I've got an opportunity. In the description of this video, there's a link where you can apply to work with me. All you need to do is answer a few simple questions, and if you're a good fit, my team will reach out so we can build a game plan together. All right, now let's get back to the video.
Let's move on to high school. You were a leader, captain of your basketball team. You played basketball, tennis, I believe, is a second sport.
Yeah.
You were a great public speaker, and I think public speaking is a skill that most people don't realize it's critical to our success in life. When did you realize you were a very good public speaker? Did you work at it? Did it come naturally? And what's your advice to people who are just terrified of public speaking? It's like, gosh, I just can't do that.
Well, we all have our fears, and I'm not too good with heights. I'm not too good with large insects, but when it comes to public speaking, I think a lot of it was just natural. And I feel like it took me well into my 40s to ever admit that I had any natural ability as an orator or otherwise in life. And I think for a lot of people who are listening, lean into that. Like, what are my natural abilities and what are things that I'm not particularly good at? I was not the valedictorian, but I got the chance to give the speech for my high school class because my classmates thought that I would be the best man for the job. I think for me, though, it really crystallized when I was working as a newspaper writer, and my copy was always clean. You know, I wasn't submitting copy that needed a bunch of editing, but I was always running into more creative writers out there who would write better leads. And yet when we would have arguments in the sports room, in the newsroom, I felt like humbly I could talk circles around these guys, you know, and when it came to articulating a sports argument, that I had that ability to put words together. So that started my wheels churning that maybe broadcast journalism would be a better fit for me than print journalism. But I guess my advice to people would be repetitions for anything. And even if you're starting a podcast and your mother is the only one who's listening, right, that's going to make you a more confident, more comfortable speaker. And I look into a camera lens on a Conor McGregor pay-per-view, and I'm speaking to tens of millions of people potentially around the world, yet I'm looking at a little black circle, right? And yet the consequence of me fucking that up is pretty large.
One of the things that you've talked about before is knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and you knew at some point you were a good public speaker. What's your advice to all the people out there, from teenagers listening to the show, college kids listening to the show, young professionals, even mid-career professionals who are saying, gosh, I really don't know what I'm good at. How do I figure out what I'm good at? You knew early you were a good speaker, but a lot of people don't. How should people go about figuring that out?
Well, trial and error is part of it, but I also feel like you need to be okay with it not happening for you at a young age. For me, Randy, I knew when I was 16 years old, and thankful to my home city and my family, but I knew that I wanted to work in sports. I didn't necessarily know that I was going to be a talker for a living. I thought I was going to be a columnist in the Boston Globe, and then I just kept running into better print writers, you know? So I think you have to just throw things at the wall, see what sticks, crystallize what you don't want to do. Because I got to ESPN, I thought I wanted to be a Sports Center anchor. I broke down the door that I was trying to break down for years. And then it's like, all right, A's and Royals, top of the fifth inning, and it's fucking 3 o'clock in the morning in Bristol, Connecticut. And then I'm eating McDonald's at 4 a.m., what's left on the late night menu. And I was just not in a good place in my life, you know, and realized that I wanted to do live events. So I think it's a constant evolution. I'm still finding myself at 45 years of age, but I do think that learning what my weaknesses were, and even if there are things that you are weak at, being willing to improve those things. One of my daughters doesn't like ordering for herself at a restaurant, so you can be sure I make her do it all the goddamn time. You know, that's a speaking thing. And even though she isn't necessarily where I thought she'd be after a year of ordering for herself, she knows now when we walk into a restaurant, Daddy's not going to, you know, bail you out if you can't pronounce rigatoni bolognese.
So at some point you're interested in being a rapper. So you got Marky Mark, who's in Boston.
Yeah.
He's from Boston.
Yeah.
Mark Wahlberg, we're talking about.
Yeah.
What was the whole rapping thing? And can you give us a little rap right now for something that you were doing back then? Oh, man,
I got to kick something that means something right here for Randy. I don't know if I could do a freestyle rap right now. I have written some lyrics within the past year. We're working on a One More Sleep track. Leona Lewis, hope she doesn't get upset. She does have a Christmas song called One More Sleep. But yeah, no, I think for a lot of my formative years, I wanted to be black. You know, I was bick in my head and wearing a bandana and wearing big Carhartt jackets. And, you know, I just wanted to be a gangster. And, you know, I think maybe part of it was that I would talk a lot or lean into the orating part of myself. But yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of our time in high school, we were either playing basketball late at night, or we were sitting in Volkswagen Jettas trying to churn out a good freestyle rap. And you probably heard me say, of the 400 times I tried to execute a clean freestyle rap, maybe got 2 or 3 of them out there cleanly. So that was not for me, but one day, in some way, we will have a track. I'll only have one verse, Randy. I'm not the star. I'm never the star. But we're going to have a One More Sleep track. It's going to be UFC centric, and we'll find a rapper who can be the lead.
Can you hit a freestyle right now real quick? Just give us something off the top of your head.
Oh, man, this guy's really putting me on the spot. TJ Dillashaw, Killashaw, best bantamweight of all time. Nah, y'all. That's Dominic Cruz, y'all. Have you seen the footwork? Sugar Sean O'Malley, former guest on this here podcast. But we got to stop it down there because we're ill prepared. And you know preparation is the key to everything I do. I'm nothing without my notes. Check out One More Sleep. It'll be on Apple Music in the not too distant future.
Love it. Appreciate you. You may get an agent after all that. We'll have to wait and see.
Let's go.
So let's talk about college. You went to Gettysburg College. You majored in political
Journalism,
journalism.
yeah.
And then you went to another kind of a graduate school, for lack of a better word, so you could become a better sportscaster. I want to talk about your internships
Yeah.
and how important those are. And we'll start with the Zone
Yes.
and how you got that one.
Yeah.
And we can take it from there.
So I never necessarily led the league in ambition. And as such, I ended up at Gettysburg College by early decision, right? I knew I could get into that school. I had a buddy that had gone there the year before, but I knew pretty early on that I had gone to the wrong college, at least as far as my professional desires were concerned. I should have gone to Syracuse University. I was sitting down with the application, Syracuse, Newhouse Public School of Journalism, or, go to Gettysburg College, and I went the more social route. So I had to end up at the American University. I did a journalism semester there, and that sort of helped me get on a journalism path. I had to create a special major in political journalism. But I had to go to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting in order to get course credit to get an internship at 1510 The Zone. And I knew that if I could get this internship at 1510 The Zone, sporting news radio affiliate in my native Boston, Massachusetts, that I could get on the air and potentially push this thing down the line. But it was going to be unpaid, and I needed course credit. So I needed to go to the Connecticut School of Broadcasting. My father thought that was systematically insane. I had just gone to Gettysburg College. I had a 4-year degree. I had a degree in journalism, and yet I'm trying to take out a loan for $12,000 to get this career training. Now, some of the training was valuable. I read a teleprompter for the first time at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting in 2003. But I spent that $12,000 to get that internship, and eventually I was able to work my way onto the air at 1510 The Zone, and that's what allowed me to get to ESPN Radio and push it down the line. But I definitely had some familial resistance when I made that decision to take out that loan.
So I do a lot of coaching, and I talk about people spending money on their own research and development efforts. So you just said something interesting that I think people are going to think is crazy, but you said you wouldn't be where you are without it. You spent $12,000 because you knew you had to get that to get an internship. What's your advice to all those people out there who say, all right, I've graduated college, and now I'm either going to work for free or I got to actually spend more money on something that may never happen in order to increase my probability of a successful result. And there's no guarantee for that.
So I can't believe I had the wherewithal in 2003 at 25 years old to think that that was the right decision, because 2 years later at 27, I was a fucking idiot making a lot of bad decisions, right? But I guess at that point in time, it was like betting on myself and just thinking that, if I could just crack a microphone, I think that maybe I'm good enough. And I didn't necessarily know if I was good enough. But even when I launched a podcast in 2015, I wasn't the lead voice of the UFC, but I felt like I could build something, even if it was a net loss for my podcast co-host and myself and our families for 5 or so years before, there was that light at the end of the tunnel. So we made even an investment at that stage of our careers, right? Anik Florian, former 3-time UFC title challenger, doing a podcast for free for half a decade. Now, we don't scream that from the rooftops that he wasn't making any money, but that is something that I'm still doing at 45 years of age, right? One More Sleep, this brand, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a cool brand, but, we're spending money on this. We're not making money. It's constant. And, thankfully we're in position, guys like you and me at this stage of our career to actually invest in ourselves. But look what you're doing, affecting change, and not doing it for your own bottom line.
I'm doing it to motivate and inspire. My goal in life is to make a material difference in the lives of 100 million people. And that's the purpose of my show. And got a book coming out called Extreme Preparation. We're going to talk about preparation in a little bit. It's one of my favorite topics.
Yes.
Is my favorite topic as well. So you went from intern to program director. Huge string of promotions. How did it happen? And what's your advice to people who start as an intern who say, gosh, it's such a long road to be somewhere senior where I am? You had to have done something incredibly good all those years.
Well, thank you. I think I'm willing to take on responsibility. And I went from being an intern to making, I think, $18,000 as the business manager. And I was doing everybody's expenses. I was answering phones. And then later in the afternoon, I might actually do a sports update. And then I'd come back to my cubicle and there would be missed sales calls. But I was willing to take on that responsibility and prove that I could be a secretary answering emails and still crank out the 4:20 p.m. Eastern update. So I think that was a big impetus for my success at that particular radio station. Small staff being willing to do a lot of different things. And by the end of my time there, not only was I on the air, but I was doing the schedule for all of the different producers. And again, at that point, crystallizing that maybe I didn't want to be a boss, right? But taking on a lot of boss type layers to my job at that point in time. But yeah, willingness to take on a responsibility. And again, just leaning into things that you're good at and leaning away from things that you're not good at. You can work on your weaknesses all you want. But I know there are things I'm never going to be good at, and you need to be willing to punt on those things as well.
I'm 55 years old. I've been in the workforce now.
Look at this guy. I mean, how good does this guy look 55 years old?
Thank you. I appreciate that. I've been in the working world now a little over 30 years, and times have changed throughout those years.
Yeah.
So I think the workforce today is very different than what it was. I think a lot of these kids coming out of college and even a lot of young professionals, more entitled, less willing to do what I call the shit work. And they want everything exciting. They want the promotion. They want the titles. Is there any substitute today for that hard work, even though times have changed? It's touchy-feely. People want to go home at 6 o'clock. To be at the best of what you do, don't you have to go back to work ethic and everything else old school?
100%. Now, you and I don't exist in a world where it's 4 days for the work week and then 3 days off, right? There are essentially no real days off, right? You're either working on yourself, you're working on your children, you're working on your profession. There really are not any days off. Like, how many days off do you have in a calendar year where you're not doing anything professional?
Less than 7.
Right. So every message to my children is rooted in hard work, for which there truly is no substitute. And sometimes I wonder why other broadcasters in a similar position don't lean into it the way I do. And perhaps they're more skilled, right? Perhaps I'm closing some sort of gap with my hard work and my preparation. But largely my pre-fight process, while it's evolved, hasn't really experienced wholesale change since I called my first MMA fight in 2009, because the system isn't broken. But the reggae artists say it all the time. Nothing that is good in life ever comes easy. And for whatever reason, I haven't been able to get that to hammer home to my children yet. Hopefully we'll get there, but we're not there.
What's interesting is you tell your children certain things. I got 5 kids, 3 in college. I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. She'll be 4 next week. Often as the parents, the dad or mom tells your kid something, they don't want to listen to you. Dad, mom, you don't know anything. But when someone close to them or a coach tells them something, it rings true.
Yeah.
Which is just a phenomenon of life. My son now, 20 years old, going into his junior year at Menlo College, he gets what his dad does. He gets all the hard work. He's a student now of business, studying hard work, and it's amazing. He went from at 14, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about, to Dad, teach me certain things, which has been just phenomenal for me as a dad and as having him as my son. It's just been so rewarding.
Well, you deserve a lot of credit for that. And I also think that is some of his wiring, right? Certainly when you procreate 5 times, or in my case, 3 times, you get to see nature versus nurture, and you see how you can have 2 daughters, as I do, who are 16, 17 months apart, and they are so different, right? And I hope they don't ingest this podcast, right? But I have one who's extremely gifted academically, but doesn't necessarily apply herself. The other is the hardest worker in the room, but is going to have to work really fucking hard, right? To realize academic success. I don't know which recipe you'd rather have.
In our careers, and usually in life, we usually have 1 or 2 big breaks. You've had 2. Let's talk about the first one, ESPN. How'd you get that job? And when you got the job, did you go into a room by yourself and say, fuck yeah, ESPN, I can't believe what were you thinking that exact moment when that happened?
I haven't had a lot of stop and smell the roses type moments, but that was definitely one of them. Just that I proved that I could do it at the highest level. But all hail Dave Jagler, the voice of the Major League Baseball Washington Nationals, because he was working as a SportsCenter anchor on ESPN radio doing the updates, and we were working together at 1510 The Zone, that sporting news radio stick in Boston, and he felt like I could realize success on the national level. So he gave me the name of the news editor, Pete Saccone, and I must have sent out 100 demo tapes to all over your state of Wisconsin, where I know one of your kids went to college, all over the place.
Michigan's where I'm from. She went to Wisconsin.
So Michigan, better be careful there. Important distinction. Yeah. So, but I sent, I couldn't get a bite back in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but I got a bite in Bristol, Connecticut. And when I went down for what I thought was an interview, they have you do a national sports updates. So I thought I was going down there to just interview. Thankfully I wasn't stoned, right? No, I'm just kidding. But I went in there and I did the 420 update, and you can either hang or you can't. And I used to say this to my broadcasting students, right? You never know what an opportunity is going to present itself. You better be as ready as humanly possible. That's why I do the podcast, even if your mom's the only one listening, because I didn't go down there expectant that they were going to put me on the radio. They did. And I got that job, and that opened the door at ESPN, allowed me to eventually transition from ESPN radio to ESPN television. But that was a huge break, and it wouldn't have happened without a colleague who didn't see me as competition. So I would also inject that into the conversation, that Dave Jagler didn't see me as any sort of appreciable threat, and put himself out there for me, and I'm forever grateful.
You didn't want to do boxing, but you had to do boxing. Sometimes we have to do something that we don't like to do. And that's also another common misperception, and where I think a lot of young people get the judgment wrong. How important is it in our careers to do things we don't want to do, to learn new things, because you never know where that opportunity is going to end up?
Yeah, I mean, there have been times in my career where I've thought, man, they got the wrong guy. Like, you sure you want me to be the guy to do this? And when I started doing updates on the New England Ringside Boxing Radio Show, I felt like maybe they had the wrong guy, because I didn't grow up a combat sports fan. My dad didn't have boxing on in the house necessarily, maybe a few times a year. So I was wondering where this was going to get me, but I developed a passion for boxing and eventually became the host of the Mouthpiece Boxing Show. And there actually was a time in my career where I saw this mixed martial arts avalanche coming, and I was defending boxing until I was blue in the face. But I just didn't necessarily see that covering boxing in a niche sport like that was going to get me where I wanted to be, either as a play-by-play announcer or as a radio guy. But again, I think it speaks to a willingness to just do whatever is presented. And the next thing you knew, I was ordering every pay-per-view. I was later covering all of those HBO pay-per-views. And even though my boxing fandom has waned considerably because they hold too much, there was a time in my life where it became a foremost passion. And if you would have told me that when I did my first update on that show, I would have said, you're absolutely insane.
So when was the first time you became a mixed martial arts fan? And what was the first fight you went to in person?
Great question. 2007, Tunica, Mississippi. I guess they call it South Haven, Mississippi, but it was Elite XC1. The main event, your son probably knows this, Renzo Gracie and Frank Shamrock. And there were a lot of big names on this fight card. I was going there as a boxing radio journalist. Gary Shaw, longtime boxing promoter, launched Elite XC, wanted to get some traction, invited the boxing media to come. I went in there not as a naysayer per se, but I didn't go in there as a total optimist. And even though when I watched the live event play out, I didn't necessarily love the dragons breathing fire and some of the things that comprise this live event, I thought mixed martial arts as a sport had a ton to offer. And I just remember going back to the hotel thinking, man, like, this sport might have more of a shelf life than boxing. And we started covering MMA increasingly so on our boxing show. And then a couple years later, I got some opportunities at ESPN.
So you're at the network for 6 years.
Yeah.
And then you got your biggest break of your career. Tell us about having to do still a bunch of shit work before that big break came in. 20 shows in Brazil, no air conditioning. And tell us about that exact moment when you're behind a truck and you get the news that you're getting the job. Take yourself mentally to that moment and said, what'd you do at that exact moment in time? What were you thinking?
Man, well, I never would have left ESPN for the UFC if I didn't think that I could eventually ascend to the #1 job. I didn't necessarily think that it would happen as quickly as it did, but there were a lot of people in my life who said, hey man, you finally got to ESPN. Why are you leaving? But I wasn't getting a lot of play-by-play repetitions. I would get one college football game per season. You're not going to get any better doing that. So in March of 2011, I was covering Shogun Rua versus John Jones in New Jersey for ESPN. And Craig Borsari, my now boss, pulled me aside and he said, next year, 2012, we're expanding our live event portfolio from 20 live events to 40. We'd like you to be a play-by-play announcer. Have your agent call me on Monday. I don't know if I've ever admitted this publicly. I didn't have an agent. I hired one on Sunday. He called Craig on Monday, and, here we are 13 years later. But in December of 2016, after I had really cut my teeth with the UFC for 6 or 7 years, they pull me aside at the TV trucks in advance of like the last live event of the year. And, I'll never forget one of my bosses now, Zach Candido, saying, you know, the company's moving on from Mike Goldberg, and we're going to give you a shot to call the play-by-plays. And I put my hands on my knees, and that was the moment of all moments for me in my career. Not Dana White flying me out to Vegas and introducing me at a press conference in 2011, but that I finally, I guess, felt like maybe I had earned something. You know, I've never won any award for broadcasting, but coming in as the number 2 guy and beating out, so to speak, the number 1 guy, or giving them enough confidence that they could move along from the guy who had been their longtime voice for 15 or 20 years, that was, you know, the moment for me.
I think a lot of kids dream about being the starting quarterback, right? Walking into the stadium, walking in the tunnel, you see 80,000 people out there. Then they got the nerves, right? For the first hike, you know, first snap, but this is the dream. So UFC 155 was your first fight. What was it like, and what were the emotions driving to the stadium and then you sitting in that chair for the first time, looking around the octagon and 20,000 fans and saying, oh my gosh, we're about to go right now?
So January 20th of 2012 in Nashville, Tennessee, I did my first UFC fight night. And I'll never forget Dana White coming into the dressing room and just giving us a pep talk, you know, saying, take off your neckties. I think now we wear neckties, or at least some of us forcibly do. But I remember having a lot of nerves, but not nearly as many as I had for Bellator 1 in 2009, when I was thinking maybe they got the wrong guy, because that was the first time I had ever called live MMA. And I had only attended an MMA show like a year and a half prior. So 2009, height of nerves, but you referenced UFC 155. And that was my first pay-per-view. And it came like 11 months on the job on 3 or 4 days notice when Goldie couldn't make the walk, so to speak. I was freaking out driving to, I guess, T-Mobile Arena or MGM Grand Arena. T-Mobile wasn't even erected at that point in time. Yeah, dude, I was freaking out. I had worked with Joe Rogan maybe on a desk, but never in that setting before. And he hadn't called fights with anyone other than Goldie in probably 15 years at that point in time. So I was freaking out. But at that point in time, I had 10 months on the job. So I certainly had more confidence going into that setting than I had back in 2009 or earlier that year. But as I've said so many times, Randy, and I'm sure you echo these sentiments, you just lean into your skills and self-belief and what got you to the dance. And as soon as you have that first utterance, you just let that stuff take over. And any nerves, I think, that you have at that point in time dissipate, and you're just focusing on the skills and the job at hand.
A lot of people listening and watching are not fight fans. A lot of people listening and watching are not fight fans. Why is the UFC the greatest show on earth? And for those people who don't like violence and think it's horrible, what are you going to tell them to maybe encourage them to even give the sport a chance?
Well, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to attend one of our live events. And I'd imagine you and your son have had the opportunity to do that at this point in time. So
for the first time, by the way, and I was not a fight fan.
Yeah.
Interviewed Dana White at the Scale Conference hosted by Kelly O'Connor. Shout out to her. And Dana and I became friends there. He invited my son and I to a show. We went for the first time, and didn't really tell Dana this because he's a huge fan and he did it for my son. But I went there and I was instantly a massive fan. And like you said, you got to go and see what it's all about. It's incredible.
So if you are fearful that you're going to become instantly hooked, I would say caution flammable, don't go, because that is really the jumping off point for a lot of UFC fans. They attend a live event and then they're completely hooked thereafter. So I can't suggest that part of it enough, even though I do believe that as a television product, our live event stands up with every professional sport out there. But I think in terms of the UFC and mixed martial arts being unpredictable theater, I'm not sure that any other sport compares. For me, growing up in this country, like, the NFL will always be king. I never thought another sport would be able to close that distance, and the UFC has effectively done that. Now, in terms of the violence, I don't know how much time you have to get into a debate about American football and ice hockey and just the relative violence in those sports, right? I covered a boxing death in 2005, right? You can get 3 concussions in a boxing match. It's very hard to get more than 1 concussion in a mixed martial arts contest because they stop the fucking fight. But our sport is superficially violent. And my kids aren't put off by the blood. My mother can't deal with the blood, right? So the blood is something that I can't necessarily help you with. The face bleeds a lot, as you well know, right? But some of the visuals in our sport, right? One human being mounting another, unanswered punches while I am, mounting another man. Those visuals can be difficult for people. And it is fight sport at the end of the day. But it's not nearly as violent as American football nor ice hockey. And there's never been a significant injury nor death in the UFC. And if I sound like Dana White, we're both speaking truth.
A lot of people want to get into the sports business. Doesn't matter what they want to do. They want to work for a professional team. They want to maybe be a play-by-play guy like you. It's very, very difficult to do. There's only a handful of people. There's 3 to 10 in your sport, depending on who's covering what. Football, there's a bunch of people, but there's really a couple, 2 or 3 main teams. That's it if you want to be the best of the best. What's your advice to all the people who want to get into the sports world? What do they have to do, not only in sports, but even to get a job at Citadel, for example, run by Ken Griffin, which had 29,000 applications for a summer internship? What should people be doing?
Well, can you imagine how many people reach out to me looking to get an internship with the UFC? Certainly not on that level, but the competition, even I would think right now to get a job with the UFC would be greater than ever. It's hard when you're pursuing something that not only you're passionate about, but is in the recreation space as well. I used to maybe affect more lives when I was a vocational coordinator for special needs children, but I didn't have a special education degree. There was a ceiling as to how much money I could make, and I thought working in sports would be more fun. So there is some sacrifice when you want to pursue that fun job, not just in terms of the time, but the willingness to put in more effort for less money early on. And I am not at all discouraging people to be pursuant of a career in sports, but you have to recognize just how competitive it is. And that's why you got to start getting your repetitions right now. And your every action has to be in some way, shape, or form towards that end goal. And you also have to know, like my twin brother in the back did, when to punt on a fucking business when it's not working out. And I was pretty close to punting on this dream. My twin brother punted on his acting dream, and I thought he punted maybe a few years before he should have. You got to know when to punt on it. But the younger you can start, and for me, I was writing, not getting paid. I was writing a column for 1510thezone.com for $0 so that when I would apply to the Metro West Daily News, I could show them writing samples, So you got to be willing to just work and grind and have hard work lead the dance. And if you can do it when you're 16, it's better than 26, but 36 isn't too late either.
Do you have interns now?
So I have an intern on my podcast, but we try to pay everybody and we try to elevate those titles. So I think we actually call him a production assistant now. But no, I guess I could have a personal intern and a mentorship program or something I've thought a lot about. Probably should talk to you about that off the air.
So what would it take for the tens of thousands of people listening, a lot of fighters, a lot of sports guys listening to this and saying, could I get an internship with Jon? Everybody can get a job with anybody, even if a company just laid off 40,000 people. I've been preaching this and teaching this. There's always a spot for that person.
Yeah.
What would it take for someone listening today to get an internship with you? What would they have to do?
Well, you can certainly find me on social media. I don't post and ghost, so words are very powerful to me. I would recommend maybe commenting as opposed to a private message because those oftentimes come in droves and are hard to sort of sift through. But, I've had the chance to change a lot of lives, I would say more with UFC tickets than with actual one-on-one contact. But no, I guess for me, Randy, if I'm being honest, on a hot live mic, I've never been a great delegator. And I have a human being in the back room right now that's my monozygotic identical twin who has the same fucking DNA as me and who works as my manager, and I'm even reluctant to delegate things to him. And perhaps that's to my own detriment at times. But I would think the long-winded answer as to why I don't have an intern right now is because I have a hard time sort of delegating out responsibility. But at Jon_Anik, we'll see what we can do.
Love it. Let's talk about my favorite topic and one of yours, which is preparation.
Yes.
And I call it extreme preparation. NFL, 1 game a week, 2 announcers. UFC, sometimes 30 fights in a week. How do you prepare for those shows? How long does it take to prepare for those shows and go through the process? Because I think people don't understand what it means to be the most prepared person in the room and how important extreme preparation is to our success?
Well, I'm going to read your book and I'm going to start listening to your podcast because I actually think you might be one of the few human beings on the face of this earth that can actually help me optimize and make my preparation more efficient. But in 2009, when I called my first fights for Bellator, it was season 1, episode 1. I didn't really know what the jumping off point was in terms of how to begin the research. I didn't have fighter bios necessarily at the beginning of that process. We had the internet, but even back then it wasn't as robust as it is today. So I just started making index cards and writing down what I thought would be the most important information. Now, Brian Stan, one of my former broadcast partners, said to me at one point in time, it's an open book test, right? Like, we're off camera for a lot of this exercise when we're calling fights. It's an open book test. You might as well show up with some notes. Now, the key is being able to optimize that note card to have committed enough of that stuff to memory by handwriting it in the case of my process, so that when you're live, you can be either watching the monitor or watching the octagon, and that information is not something that you have to necessarily look down at. But when you talk about 30 fighters and 15 fights, and I might be in a situation where I have a back-to-back, Saudi Arabia, June 22nd, I got 30 athletes, and then June 29th, Conor McGregor returns at UFC 303. I got 56 or 60 athletes in a span of 8 days. How much time am I devoting to each athlete? And mentally, sometimes that can be hard to wrap my head around. And certainly during the COVID climate, when we went to 15 fights a card, I said to my boss, like, these matchmakers are fucking killing me. Something's going to fall through the cracks, right? And I don't want that to happen. So it's exhaustive. It's a labor of love. Like, sometimes I'll sit at the Palm Beach County Public Library and I'm watching sports, right? I'm watching fights and writing notes, and I'll think to myself, you're getting paid to watch sports. But all of my anxiety in this job, or 99% of it, is in the extreme nature of the preparation, and maybe 1% of my anxiety is in the actual performance.
I hope you're enjoying this video so far, but before we jump back in, I want to know if you've ever thought about what you need to do to reach the next level of success in your life. Over the last 25 years, I've been an advisor to more than 50 companies. I've invested nearly 100, including Google, Lyft, and Seagate, and I also co-founded a company that today is worth more than $15 billion. I've been incredibly blessed in my journey, and at this stage in my life, I want to give back. I want to share the lessons I've learned so you can reach incredible success way faster than I did. In my own journey, I've learned that having the right mentor is a massive advantage to achieving our goals. I'm hugely passionate about mentoring others, and I'm looking for a few hungry entrepreneurs who are excited to take action on their journey to incredible future success. So if that's you, I've got an opportunity. In the description of this video, there's a link where you can apply to work with me. All you need to do is answer a few simple questions, and if you're a good fit, my team will reach out so we can build a game plan together. All right, now let's get back to the video.
So give us some quantitative figures. If you're doing back-to-back shows in a week, is it 40 hours?
It's
is
every
it
hour,
80 hours?
every hour that's available to me. I don't turn on the TV in the hotel room. I barely FaceTime or talk to my kids. There's always one more interview you can read. There's always one more fight you can watch from early on in the UFC careers. I'm not saying this stuff and professing myself as the hardest worker in the room. It's a fear of failure, showing up to the octagon. And I can't tell you how many times on show day, when we have a pay-per-view at Madison Square Garden, when my call time is not till 6 p.m., the nugget I use on the walkout is the final thing that I uncovered before I went to the arena. So quantitatively, trying to give you an hour, I mean, the process starts about 10 days out. We voice over a lot of the stuff in advance. So I would say I have probably 3 hours of voiceover work in advance of a pay-per-view.
Same day?
No. So it'll be, oftentimes the voiceovers might be 8 or 9 days out, and then I'll do some voiceovers the day before the show, right? We might battle with a pronunciation and something might have to be revoiced. There might be an error in something that has been laid to tape. So there are a lot of different circumstances. And the UFC broadcast is a completely different beast, right? Like, we can talk about the intensive nature of an NFL broadcaster schedule, 17 straight weeks plus the playoffs, but they're on a mic for 3 hours. We're doing 8 hours. So it's a little bit of a different exercise that we're walking into.
You know, you mentioned something, it's minor, but it's major. Pronunciation of certain names, words. Akamai Technologies is the name of the big technology company that I started today, 10,000 employees, $4 billion in revenues. People come in for job interviews, Akamai. All you need to do.
Bye.
Right, bye. All you need to do, well, one other bye-bye after 10 seconds is, what's my dog's name? Which is on my website. So if you can't read my website and don't know my dog's name is Karma, the interview's over and people have open mouths. What? And it's, yeah, what? Bye. You don't know, but
you don't know what you're
pronunciating names. If you're in doubt, go to Google Translate.
Right.
So you do all these things, makes you the best at what you do. You're considered the best at what you do in the history of the sport. What do you do to stay on top? And are you constantly improving on yourself? How important is it not to rest on our laurels if we want to be the best?
So one of the most difficult things and inconvenient truths of being a talker for a living is that you have to scrub your own work and you have to go back, as I'm sure you do, and listen selectively to your own podcasts and watch, as is the case for me, my UFC pay-per-view opens. And sometimes I'm not particularly fond of those deliveries or the way that I look on camera. I would come back to my identical twin. It's a tremendous resource for me to have, right? Somebody who is a living, breathing, walking human being that's just like me, who goes through my work and tells me largely what he doesn't like. But that's something that, I think Anik Florian, my podcast co-host, doesn't do enough of, right? Is going back and listening to our work, because it's a pain in the ass, right? You get sick of the sound of your own voice. But that is something that I have always leaned into. There was a time in my career, I guess, where I was caught on an open mic saying, yeah, I work hard, but am I any fucking good, right? And I felt like there was a time where I would always get all this credit for being prepared and working hard, but maybe not for being a performer or being actually good at the craft. And I would take exception to that. And, I don't regret necessarily saying that, but what I've realized is that, the key to my success really is hard work and evolving my process a little bit in terms of taking things off of my fighter card that I'm not using on fight night, right? First round finishes is something that I was very rarely going back for. I could always ask the truck on my talk back button for that. So refining the process, I have tried to learn and master how to pause, and I'm still working on that 22 years into this broadcasting career, getting away from verbal crutches, just being comfortable with some dead air or with a pause. But yeah, constantly working on my craft and wanting to create a gap between me and whoever's chasing me.
Innovation is critical to our success. UFC kicked boxing's ass because of what it did. HBO stayed, did the same thing. Dana White comes along, completely changes the nature of the sport. It's a big show, like team feedback is important. What could the UFC be doing better than it is doing today? And you say, walk into Dana's office, hey Dana, I got an idea for you. You ever do that? And what does he say?
So part of the reason we've realized so much success in terms of our live event production. Now, we never get any Emmy consideration when it comes to our championship coverage. And I do feel bad for our producers that their championship coverage and directors has not been acknowledged by that Emmy body, because I really do believe I would put our live event from a live production standpoint up against all of these other sports. But I do think there are things that we could do to make our production better. I think first and foremost would be to show as many fighter walks as possible. And I know our commercial inventory is robust, but oftentimes we're talking through those fighter walks and you guys are not getting those at home. So what can we do to shorten up other things during the broadcast to show those fighter walks? Because those are our maximum moments for humanization when those fighters are walking out. And yeah, I think that's a suggestion that we have thrown out there at times, and they do it whenever possible for big fights, but it's just a really difficult thing for the UFC fight nights, but that's always the foremost suggestion from me. I don't know that it's necessarily an open forum. It's not that the UFC considers the source of said suggestion, but I'd be lying if I said that I'm banging down doors trying to affect major change when it comes to our broadcast. I think there are some innovators in there, but Dana White fine-tooth combs this thing. He does micromanage the whole process.
We all make mistakes in our careers. We have challenges. We make mistakes. You've made one, recent one, UFC 297. You said something about the fans. Let's talk about that briefly. What did you say? And how important is it to say, I'm sorry, to be successful?
So I guess I just had an emotional moment on the podcast, and it stemmed from some frustration with a lot of fans who were alleging bias in a fight between Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis for the middleweight championship back in January. And I really kind of went down a rabbit hole on Sean Strickland's Instagram page and just was leaning too much into a lot of those allegations of bias after what I thought was a very close fight. And I think as a play-by-play guy, if you don't have objectivity, you have nothing. And so for me, those are the criticisms that I take most seriously. As far as the regrettable utterance on my podcast, it was me just sort of having a moment. I think Dana White said Anik had a little bit of a meltdown, and that's sort of all it was. You know, I don't think going at the fans or challenging the fans in that way is any sort of positive, but, you know, my whole reputation has been built on fan engagement and having a relationship with this fan base, you know, and I have so much love and support from the fans that maybe it put me in a place of liberation where I felt like I could sort of have an open conversation with the fans who, I guess, even if it was a small portion, were really taking issue with that particular call. But there've been several times where I've had to apologize publicly. You know, I remember an instance with Michael Bisping, one of my broadcast partners, and Colby Covington several years ago. Colby Covington wins the interim championship, and I thought Michael Bisping was upstaging him on the post-fight show, and I probably should have just kept my mouth shut. And then I engaged there and I said, let's not upstage the athlete as the analyst. And then I issued a public apology to Michael Bisping, which probably put more fuel on the fire. So I'm not afraid to apologize when I think that I have stepped out of bounds. And certainly when it came to one particular utterance at the fan base this past January, you know, I wish I could have that one back. But, you know, the result of that was that I sort of got all this love and appreciation from the rest of the fan base and the fighters. And I was not looking for more attention nor appreciation. So, you know, maybe there was a little bit of a blessing veiled in there. But at the end of the day, it was just way more noise during a slow MMA news cycle that I could have done without.
Did it feel good to say I'm sorry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always does. I mean, I don't know how your marriage is, but I apologize way more than my wife does. That's for sure.
My rabbi at our wedding said the 3 most important words in a marriage is I am sorry. And boy, was that right.
There you go. There you go.
That was right. You're live on a mic with tens of millions of fans. Maybe I think the biggest fight, maybe even more than 100 million fans. A lot of pressure. We live in a cancel culture today. One word that's off, you could be done. How much pressure is that? Do you think about that?
I try not to think about that. I think more about some health issue with my vocals that would resign me to going back to print journalism. But Tom Brady recently did an announcement with Michael Strahan. And it was Tom, I don't know if you saw this, Tom talking about his first assignment for the NFL on Fox is going to be the Cleveland Browns against the Dallas Cowboys. One of the first times in a public setting for Tom Brady as analyst. And he started talking about the Cowboys quarterback, Dak Prescott. And he said something to the effect of, you know, we'll see if Dak Prescott can finally break through. And you are heretofore, Tommy, going to be judged on every single utterance. And even though what Tom was implying is we'll see if Dak can finally get over the hump and win a Super Bowl.
Right.
But the line itself is suggestive that Dak really hasn't done a whole lot of anything. And it was particularly critical. Now, Tom Brady is paid to be critical. But the lesson is you're going to be judged on every single utterance. And you have to just be very careful, but you also have to recognize that. And you can't not be critical for fear that your contemporaries or athletes are going to take issue with those words. So I try to not think too much about that. But my personality is such that I do walk right up to that line and try not to cross it, right? You know, you can Google Jon Anik 209 tattoo if you really want to, right? But there are definitely times where, you know, my personality maybe puts me in jeopardy of having, you know, my career canceled or, you know, getting on my boss's radar. But I also am who I am. And, you know, I haven't always been like a fall in line guy. So
for those people who don't know, tell us about the lost bet and the tattoo.
Well, it's not a lost bet necessarily, right? I mean, it's a tattoo that I wanted, right? Like if you really know the story, Nick Diaz was my favorite fighter. And I was trying to bring attention to my podcast. Nate Diaz was fighting Conor McGregor on like 2 weeks notice. And so I called Kenny Florian and I thought, you know, maybe I'll do a tattoo bet. There was the second tattoo bet I had done on my podcast. And I said, if Nate comes out of vacation in Cabo and beats Conor McGregor this weekend, I'll get a 209 tattoo on my arm. It'll bring attention to the podcast, and also a good way for me to sort of honor the Diaz brothers if it happens, because I related to those guys. I really like Nick. I would always tell people Nick Diaz was my favorite fighter when I was first getting into mixed martial arts. But what happened was during fight week, before the fight had happened, somehow, some way, I was the number 2 guy. I wasn't calling the pay-per-view. I wasn't covering the live event, but my comments got on Nate Diaz's radar. And so he went on a hot mic and he went on social media and just said, what the hell is Jon doing? And then my bosses, it got on their radar. And then Nate ends up winning the fight. And at that point in time, once Nate was upset, I was getting the tattoo win or lose out of respect, right? Nate wins the fight. And he closes out the UFC press conference by saying, if Jon Anik doesn't get that 209 tattoo, I'm going to whip his little ass. So about a year ago, I actually showed my daughters that clip and explained to them the sort of backstory of it. But I've done probably 4 or 5 tattoo bets on my podcast. I would never do a tattoo bet for something that I wasn't comfortable having emblazoned on my body for the rest of my life, And so this is the one we have. And the other tattoo bets haven't come in. But I assure you, this will not be the last tattoo bet nor the last tattoo that I get.
What's it like working with Joe Rogan?
Gosh, man, there's nothing like it. And I won't be the first talking head to suggest to you that he really is a better human being than he is a podcaster. And I know a lot of his genuineness comes across on his show, but he's just such a good dude. And I'll just think back to the warm embrace in 2012 when he didn't know me from a hole in the wall. And I got that call on 3 days notice, or to the time that I got promoted in 2017, and his longtime broadcast partner was shown the door, and he even embraced me then, however reluctantly. So I don't know that I have more eternal gratitude for anybody as far as my career is concerned, and him putting me over as, the best play-by-play guy out there. I can't even tell you what that has done for me, because I don't consider myself to be that, but his opinion affects so much of what public opinion is, so I got people coming up to me calling me the fucking GOAT. Joe's the GOAT. I ain't the GOAT, right? But when he calls you that, it obviously has a lot of traction. So there's nothing like his dynamicism in a broadcast booth. There's nothing like his comedy on fight night. I mean, nobody gets deeper belly laughs out of me like Joe Rogan does. And it just feels bigger and badder and better when he is there. And as I've said repeatedly, Randy, he's going to do this job way past the time that I do it. I think he's gonna be around forever, and hopefully, for the sake of MMA fans, that's the truth.
We all meet incredible people in our life, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 max. We think that person is just one of the greatest people I've ever met. They're generous, they're loyal, they do things that most people wouldn't do. How amazing is Dana White?
He's unbelievable, and when I say this, I hope it doesn't fall on deaf ears. Mixed martial arts would probably cease to exist in this country without UFC CEO Dana White and the Fertittas buying the UFC. Mixed martial arts is so big in this country right now, potentially having closed into that top 4 with respect to the NHL as a mainstream top 4 sport in this country. So a lot of people might scoff when you say it wouldn't exist without Dana, but he was so bullish on the sport, they bought the UFC and just continued to pour money into a sport that they thought could be the greatest spectacle in professional sports. So I don't know that there's any greater compliment I could give the man. And then I would go to the global pandemic setting when we were all willing to somehow, some way get to Lemoore, California with masks on and rental cars and small airplanes and everything else, because we would go through a brick wall for that guy. I mean, his staff is so loyal because he has been so loyal to that staff. So when he wanted to be the only show in town during a global pandemic, even though I might have had some trepidation, I wanted to be that guy for that guy. So even though at times we butted heads, even though he rode me really hard early on, I do think, even though I respond to different leadership styles, I respond to his sort of tough love, hardened leadership style, and I feel like I've earned his respect.
It's one thing to be a great boss and to give people credit for what they built, because I think you're right. UFC, mixed martial arts would not be here today, but for him, it was an unloved, unproven, violent sport.
Yeah.
People thought it was a bunch of animals in the sport. 1993, they were nearly going bankrupt. But talk about how incredible Dan is as a human being.
Well, Joe Rogan and Dana White are super philanthropic, but they don't scream from the rooftops about it. And all due respect to all the philanthropists out there who show you exactly what they do. And it's vast, right? But he does so many things for so many people, right? Like our IT guy just offhandedly, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but just said something about the Suns and the Celtics playing a regular season game. The next thing you know, the dude's sitting behind the fucking bench in Phoenix, and those gestures have happened thousands of times over, and you experienced one yourself. So Heart of Gold doesn't even begin to describe it. And I do think it flies in the face of a little bit of his hardened exterior at times. And maybe they don't think that side of him dovetails with, the bullish UFC executive that is willing to take on all comers. But he's very much a layered, multifaceted individual. And yeah, one of the more, deep-hearted, philanthropical guys I've ever come across.
For those people listening and watching the show today, if you haven't checked out my pod with Dana, he does tear up a little bit, and I did make Dana cry at the Grand Ballroom at the Bellagio Hotel for the Scale Conference. Hopefully we'll be able to put that video up as well. But as you said, he does amazing things for people. He doesn't like talking about it. At the conference, I did make him talk about it, and he called it an Oprah moment, which is great. Talk about UFC 300. Why was it one of the greatest cards of all time? And then talk about that ridiculous knockout with 1 second to go.
I don't even know where to begin. I probably cussed enough today. But if you think back to UFC 200 in 2016, I don't know where you were, but probably in a decidedly different place than 2024. I mean, I wasn't calling UFC 200. Right. I was in the building. But these milestone events, and I could sit here and suggest to you that UFC 303, headlined by Conor McGregor here in a few weeks, is a monumental event in its own right. But UFC 400 is going to be in 2032. So these things happen every 8 years. So you can hope that the calendar aligns perfectly and you can have all this star power and your athletes can stay healthy and you can line up this perfect fight card. But you never know if it's going to stay together. And then the date finally materializes and you hope that the fight card delivers, but you just never know. And then you put together a BMF title fight between Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway, and you feel like it is the most bulletproof piece of matchmaking that you've ever put together. You know that fight's going to entertain. And then you start to think maybe the UFC has a horseshoe up its ass, because on the biggest night in promotional history, one of the biggest fights ends with the consensus greatest knockout in UFC history. And if you don't know, Max Holloway knocking out Justin Gaethje with 1 singular second to go. Justin Gaethje face first to the canvas. And I think back to so many things at UFC 300, like just hitting the talkback button to the truck and the producers being like, are you guys kidding me? Like, how good are you kidding me? Like, you just can't draw it up any better. And I just kept thinking, like, there's just no possible way for the sport to top this. And yet somehow, some way, this sport has a history of topping itself. So we'll see. But I don't think that moment gets topped anytime soon.
For all the fans out there who haven't seen the knockout, it's on YouTube, the video. And your reaction and Joe Rogan's reaction was unbelievable.
Yeah, well,
it was incredible.
I'm thinking in that moment about the call as much as anything else. But when something like that happens so late in the fight, it's an out-of-body experience a little bit. I've oftentimes talked about how I don't always control my diaphragm properly when I'm breathing, so I am on the cusp of passing out potentially, and I do start to see stars. But at that point in time, yes, it's UFC 300. Yes, it's for the BMF title, but with 1 second to go, had to somehow be hammered home. And you do hope, by the way, as the play-by-play guy, you're cheating the clock, looking at the clock, you hope that the record will dovetail with the call and it won't be at 4:58 or with 2 seconds to go, right? So, but to me, I saw 4:59 or I saw 0:01 and I was like, dude, like it was 1 second to go. It wasn't 3, it wasn't 2. So twice in the call, we do reference 1 second to go. And thankfully we got the call right. But in that moment, right, I remember early on in my career, like I was reluctant to just hammer through, maybe fearful to steamroll Joe Rogan or Daniel Cormier. And now obviously this deep in, it's like, I got to go. I got to finish that championship call come hell or high water. And, if there's a little bit of a traffic jam, so be it. But dude, it was absolutely insane. Just complete pandemonium.
I interviewed Dana for my show 2 days before, and which was incredible timing. And then my wife and I went to UFC 300.
Oh, wow.
We were in Vegas for the show. So we're with some friends at a 3:30 dinner. They work for Bill Foley, who owns the Knights, and they're of course in a bunker box, and we're waiting for 2 extra tickets that people don't show, and we're like, man, it didn't come through. So with maybe 2 hours before the fight, we just said, fuck it. We went online, we paid $2,500 a ticket for great seats. It was great.
That
is so
incredible.
Good, by the way.
It's so good, right? I mean, the most I've ever spent for a sporting ticket in my life, $4,500 to see the Patriots play the Rams in the Super Bowl in Atlanta, Georgia. It's the best money I've ever spent. That's so great that you guys did that.
It was awesome. You're 45 years old. Your contract expires in 2006. You've talked about you want to maybe be play-by-play for football, NFL. Your dream job maybe is be the daily announcer for the Boston Red Sox. What's next for you?
So it's crazy to think that at the end of this contract in 2026, I'll be 15 years in, and to think that I've spent so much more time with the UFC than I did at ESPN back in the day, even though we are on ESPN right now. I think for an American football fan like me, there's always going to be part of me that wants to scratch that itch and prove to myself and my family and my supporters that I can call NFL football and realize success, not only at the highest level of my craft, but in the sport that is the most ubiquitously viewed in the United States of America. So I don't know that the NFL itch is ever going to go away with any sort of ointment, but I have the job that I want. And I don't know that any live event is going to be as exciting for me to call as a UFC pay-per-view. I think most of these other events are going to pale in comparison. And even when maybe I had some wayward comments about the fans back in January, Joe Rogan texted me immediately and said, don't leave for a less exciting sport, and most of the sports are less exciting. But I also am largely focused on, as trite as it sounds, earning this seat for every show, and making sure that, they don't want to give the number 2 or number 3 guy an opportunity to do a pay-per-view because they think they'd be losing too much, Like I want, even though I never tuned in for announcers, to keep hearing from UFC fans who say they tune in for me and that it's a worse experience when I'm not there. So I have the job that I want. If I'm a betting man, I would say I probably don't call an NFL game and I re-sign with the UFC, and this is what I do until the voice goes out. But having done major college football on the national level, I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't dream of, gracing a Detroit Lions, Minnesota Vikings booth before it's all said and done.
That's awesome. Before we conclude today, I want to finish my podcast with some open-ended questions. I call this part of my show, Fill in the Blank to Excellence. You ready to play?
Yes.
The biggest lesson I've learned in my life is?
Be ready for an opportunity, because you might actually have to do the 4:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Update, even though you're ill-prepared. So be ready.
My number one professional goal is?
To call an NFL football game.
My biggest regret in life is?
My biggest regret in life is not going to college with my twin brother and being on a similar trajectory with him at a younger age to try to maximize ourselves as identical twins, right? We haven't been in a Doublemint commercial yet, and the clock is ticking.
My number one personal goal is?
My number one personal goal is to be a more present father, not just being there, but to be mentally present in those moments, right? To not be thinking about work when I'm with my kids.
I struggle with that all the time. And it's part of being, I hate to say being successful, but to being obsessive about what you're doing and wanting to be the best and always thinking there's more I could be doing. But as my kids get older, and you'll see this with your kids as well, the funnel to spend more time with them gets less and less.
Right.
And
right.
It happens so fast.
Right.
When they get to be 16 years old, they want
right.
to hang out with you. Well, really at 14. And then
right.
each year it gets less and less. And then when they go to college, you really don't see them anymore. But I
right.
think it's something I struggle with and I'm working on
yeah.
very, very hard.
Yeah. No, I feel like my daughters even right now lean on me for things that they will be leaning on boyfriends for in the not too distant future. Where are you guys? I'm getting fucking tired.
Yeah. My biggest fear in life is?
Other than heights, I think it's failure and just having a bad broadcast and having Joe Rogan ask me, hey, which neck fusion surgery did Brian Kelleher get? And this is the one time this has happened. I said, you know what, Joe, I don't have that answer for you. So
my purpose in life is?
My purpose in life is to create successful children and to allow people through my professional work to have some sort of escapism from just how difficult life is. And even though I used to work with special needs kids and I think really affected lives in a more profound way, I do think that we affect a lot of lives with the work that we do, even in a recreational way. And, I do feel purposive, I guess, about that.
The best announcer in sports history is?
Sean McDonough, still getting it done in his prime in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup playoffs right now. Perhaps there's a little Boston bias in there. I think Jim Lampley is the greatest combat sports play-by-play guy of all time. I have a lot of other announcers I look up to, but Sean McDonough is the GOAT.
Al Michaels, do you believe in miracles?
A tremendous call, right? And not something that he probably thought a whole lot about. I don't know if he has admitted as to whether or not that was something that originated organically out of his mouth. But yeah, Al Michaels is a complete stud. And it's amazing how many guys in the sports broadcasting field keep doing it deep into their 60s and 70s. I can assure you I'm not going to be on a microphone past the age of 70 if I'm even still here. There's no way.
The craziest thing that's happened in my career or life is?
Definitely taking the leap of faith with the UFC and moving to Las Vegas with a 2-month-old daughter, thinking that I had finally gotten to ESPN and I was going to hunker down in Connecticut. Still to this day, I think about my young family moving to Vegas, thinking not what were we doing, but like, are we really doing this?
If you could create your one dream fight, what would it be?
Gosh, some of them are fights that go back in time. But for me, like right now, we have the consensus greatest of all time, John Jones against Tom Aspinall, who a lot of people believe is the most skilled heavyweight they've ever seen. So John Jones versus Tom Aspinall is the dream fight right now. But the fact that we never saw George St. Pierre versus Anderson Silva just sticks in my craw. Lorenzo Fertitta was always the strike while the iron's hot type of guy, and they never got GSP Anderson Silva to the finish line, unfortunately.
The one thing I've dreamt about doing for a long time but haven't is?
Just vacations, right? And I don't mean trips with children, but you and I talked on air and off air just about the intense, noisy nature of our lives. And I think I need to lean more into vacation and then just being present when I'm on those vacations. But sometimes the noise doesn't turn off. But if you were to ask me, like, when's the last time you went on a vacation free of children, I don't think I could tell you the answer.
10 years from now, I'm going to be?
10 years from now, I'm going to be a better golfer. I'm going to be shooting in the low 80s consistently. I will have had one sort of knee or hip surgery, I would think, from pickleball. But I'll be a better golfer, and I won't be traveling as much internationally.
We built a pickleball court at our house 8 years ago.
Wow.
Early in it, we have some really fun games. A lot of interesting people come over. When you're in LA, you got to come over and play with us.
I will.
It's cool. It's
and I got
fun.
My new tournament doubles partner right here, Jay. If you're listening, Randy's our guy. So
there you go. What's the one piece of advice you would give to your 21-year-old self?
So I always knew that discipline was greater than motivation, but I didn't learn acutely about hard work until probably 10 years thereafter. So I guess I would have said to my 21-year-old self, just lean more into the hard work. And even if I would go back a few years before 21, I just became like obsessed with like girls and different things when I should have been more focused on like high school basketball and optimizing myself as an athlete, So just leaning into the hard work earlier. My daughters and my son are so sick of hearing it, but I was a much harder worker at 27, 28 than I was naturally at 21.
If you could meet one person in the world, who would it be?
Bill Belichick. I mean, that is the easiest question Randy has asked me here today. I have drawn so much inspiration from him. I think he's perpetually misunderstood, as a lot of public figures are. Even at Tom Brady's roast recently, he's saying, I'm not a bad guy, and people are sort of laughing. And, Bill Belichick's the fucking man, and I dream that I get the chance to shake his hand. His kids went to the same high school that I went to, so there's connective tissue there. But with respect to all the great leaders and politicians and human beings and philanthropists out there, Bill Belichick every day of the week.
The Tom Brady host was outrageously hilarious. Tom has come out and said he was regretful of the impact it had on his kids. There were a lot of sexual jokes about Giselle, kid's mom, but it was great. And it's amazing that, not great because of his kids, by the way, the whole thing was just funny.
Right.
Funny as shit, actually.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And Belichick went on the show and became more of a human being to people. A lot of people were very surprised.
Yeah. I mean, they poked fun at him, like walking out of some random chick's house or apartment in the middle of the night, you know, but it's interesting when you're in the public eye, because my daughters aren't yet at the age where they are Googling me, but certainly unlike you, and I'm being suggestive here, but there's a lot more inflammatory stuff out there that I have said probably that you have that my kids will eventually come across. And it's not that I don't consider myself a role model necessarily, but I want my kids to know who I am. And so if that means that they come across a rant about recreational drugs at some point in time, like, I'm okay with that, you know? So I'm okay with certain things. I think I would have been more okay with that roast than Tom was.
The one question you wish I had asked you but didn't is?
Gosh, you know, I know you have drawn rave reviews for all of your ability to formulate questions. I guess if there's one question, you know, what's it going to take for the UFC to get to that next level? And I think it's just time. You know, I certainly think this next TV deal is going to be huge for us, right? You have the Fox deal that laid the foundation for the ESPN deal. People thinking $4.2 billion. Is this crazy? Did Ari Emanuel overpay? Now it looks like an underpayment, right? So what is this next TV deal going to hold? Is it really going to be on Netflix and available to that many more millions of people? So we just need time, but I do think eventually this sport, not just globally, but domestically, becomes as big as anything else out there. And thankfully, we got you on the bandwagon now.
I love it. Is there anything on the show you want to promote before we end here today?
No, I mean, thankful for the time with you today, and look forward to picking your brain as a mentor in the not too distant future. And I would just be thankful to this entire fan base, you know, for just supporting me, and gives us a lot of confidence as broadcasters to feel that love from the fans. And these are special live events. You know, I'm trying to sort of recognize that the journey is the destination, and to not forget to have fun while I'm doing these, you know, hard broadcasts. But no, just really thankful to, you know, be with you today. And we look forward to UFC 303 and Conor McGregor's return here in a few weeks.
You're an awesome guy.
Thank you, man.
Congratulations on all of your immense success, and thanks for welcoming me to South Florida today.
My man, you too.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, Randy.